Europe, Maxime Prévost, who is Belgium's Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister, and Arseniy Yatsenyuk, who is a former Ukrainian Prime Minister and now, let me get the title right.
Doesn't matter.
Chair of the Kyiv Security Forum. Benjamin, we're now almost 6 months into the Trump administration. Europe is trying to find a place for itself, a firm place vis-a-vis Ukraine. What does Europe want from the US in these terms, and what can you expect?
Yeah, well, first, it's great to be here, and thanks for inviting me. I was listening to General Kellogg just right now, and I was really struck by your words, and I completely share what you said. You talked about the need for unity in the alliance, consistency of our message, the strength that we show to both our friends and allies and to our adversaries. And I think this is something on which you see clear unity of purpose, action, and messaging from the United States, the Trump administration, and Europeans. We share the end game. We want peace in Europe. We want peace in Ukraine. We want a just and lasting peace, not just a break or a ceasefire that Russia can use to regroup, rearm, and re-attack. Because we know our history, we know the past, we know what's happened after the Budapest Memorandum, where Ukraine received security guarantees on a document, gave up its nuclear arsenal, and then Russia violated the borders of Ukraine. We know what happened after the Minsk agreements in 2014, 2015, where Russia violated dozens of times and then attacked with a full-scale aggression in 2022. So our purpose is clearly to create the conditions for, first, an end of hostilities, an unconditional 30-day ceasefire, because you don't negotiate under bombs. You need to create a framework where you can have a serious negotiation. And this is, by the way, something that President Zelensky and the Ukrainians have repeatedly said that they were in favor of. President Zelensky in the last few months has said time and time again that he's ready to sit down with President Putin, that he's ready to negotiate, that he's ready for a ceasefire, and then leading to peace negotiation. And today what we see, despite the very strong efforts of both the United States and Europeans, is that there's one country that still refuses to negotiate in good faith, that still refuses serious diplomacy, and that's still escalating both on the ground militarily and in its rhetoric and its demands on Ukraine. It's Vladimir Putin's Russia. And so I think this is where we really need to show very strong unity and strength and increasing the pressure on Russia. The European Union just passed the 17th package of sanctions. We're discussing the 18th package where we can increase the pressure, especially on the energy sector. We know that Russia is still drawing resources from energy exports, both gas and oil, to fuel its war against Russia. So increasing the pressure to really show that there's no military path for Russia, that we need to put people around the table, we need to negotiate, and then we'll have in the long run, and I'm sure we'll discuss this a bit further in the conversation, we'll have in the long run to discuss the security guarantees that we provide Ukraine. We'll have to continue to support the Ukrainian army in the long run, because that's the best security guarantee as well, precisely to prevent Russia from re-attacking. But, you know, I just want to say that a few months ago, I remember all the commentary that said that you'd see divisions in the alliance. The truth is, in the last more than 3 years, we've supported Ukraine with military means, with economic pressure on Russia, with humanitarian and legal support. We've seen very strong support from the United States. We see this support today for Ukraine, and we need to continue in this united way, once again, to bring back peace and deterrence in Europe.
General Kellogg, this question, how can pressure be increased on Vladimir Putin to the point that he negotiates seriously? And along those lines, do you get the sense, is President Trump disappointed that he hasn't been able to get Putin to serious negotiations?
Yeah. Thanks, Dan. Thanks for the question. Thanks for having me. You know, one thing I've always said to the audience when I talk to them, I am not the President of the United States. I do not speak for the President. that'll get you in trouble or get you fired pretty fast. Okay, and you only pick up indications. And I think, one thing I think that I really is a real advantage that President Trump has. I think his instincts are wicked good. They're really good at what it is. But he also think he does very effectively is he reaches out and talks to people. He gets a full range of input from his advisors. It's almost Socratic in nature, meaning he'll say something, he'll go out and his advisors will come back and they'll say, this is where we're going. And they'll pick up the phone and talk to anybody. And I think that's a real advantage leaders have, of picking up the phone and saying, okay, where do you want to be? I mean, the fact of the matter is, President Biden did not talk to Putin in over 4 years. And President Trump has talked to Putin twice in the last 4 weeks. And he'll pick up the phone and he'll talk to President Zelensky, he'll talk to Putin, he'll talk to Macron of France, he'll talk to, we had Chancellor Merz was in the White House this last week. And he had Prime Minister Starmer from the UK was also in. So he'll talk to people, and I think he gains more and more information when he talks to them and what his advisors say. Like anybody else, I'm sure, because he sees the absolute human costs of war, and it does affect him. When he was talking to President Zelensky recently inside the Oval, he did something that I thought was really kind of neat. And he's the one who brought it up. And he says, how do we get the children home? Mm. And he said, and that shows to me he understands the depth of this issue and the holistic view of it. And they said, okay, how do we figure out, maybe on the next technical talks, how do we get the kids brought back in? And right now, I know The Hague's got a list of all those children that have been taken by the Russians. I think the number's well over 19,000. And so we kind of know what their original names were, kind of where they went to, and if we can get them home. I think any mother and father, most of us are mothers and fathers, you want to see your kids come home again. And I think that he sees that. He's working at it really hard. He's got a great Secretary of State in Marco Rubio. And Rubio has been working it hard. But his frustration is, I believe, we're talking about the president, the frustration is, how do you get across the wire? How do you get it, I always say, how do you get to go? In other words, where do we find a state where this is all acceptable? This is where you want to be. And I know that, for those of us that have worked with President Trump, we have in the back of our mind, it's a term we use privately. We don't use it publicly. Of course, here I am talking about it publicly. The term we use is Trump time. Mm-hmm. You live on a level where he says, let's get this done. You move out as hard and as fast as you can. And we're seeing pressures potentially. Lindsey Graham's got a sanctions bill that's coming out. He wanted to get that onto the floor before the G7 in Canada is coming, which is coming up in a week. And he's got over 92 co-sponsors of the bill. And I think the chance of that happening is, at least bringing it to the floor of the Senate, is quite high. And then the question is, will the president veto it or will he sign it? And they're pretty extensive on the sanctions. Originally when we started doing this, we went into the Oval Office, and I took my team in and we kind of briefed everybody. This is what it looks like to all of us. This is where we currently see it. This is where we want to take it to. How do you do it? And the Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent, made the comment, when it comes to sanctions, if you looked at the sanctions we currently have, and 1 being basically toothless, 10 being hard, we're probably at a 6 on sanctions, but we're only a 3 on enforcement. And you've got to enforce the sanctions you put out there, because if you don't enforce them, they're worthless. And I think where you want to get is, how do you enforce the sanctions? And that's going to be the big one. So the question is, what does it look like to enforce them, especially with things like what we call the shadow fleet? The fleet that's moving a lot of the illicit oil through the Baltic Sea to India or to China. And at least 70% of that is going out through the Baltics. Yeah. And I know Estonia recently intercepted one of the ships that was moving that, which maybe you're going to have to do that. We did that in the first Trump administration with North Korea. and when they were moving coal from North Korea to China, we used Coast Guard cutters to interdict that traffic. So it's one of those things, okay, well, how do you, in a law enforcement role, what do you use your cutters for? Can you do that in a law enforcement role? And I think it's proven historically we can do that if we want to do it, but you got to have the presidential desire and the willingness to do it.
Maxime Prévost, and I have to jump in. This is a very important discussion, but Mr. Prévost has a royal audience a little bit later, so we may have to excuse him while the conversation is going on. So if he gets up and leaves, that's why. We just heard about U.S. ability to project power, and General Kellogg earlier talked about the upcoming Hague summit for NATO. Spending being a big target. 5%, up from 2%. Belgium isn't even at 2% yet and has been among the countries furthest behind on this. Will Belgium step up? Will it commit to spending 5%? And do you think, not that you speak for other countries, but NATO Secretary General Rutte is in Italy today. You know, Italy's another country. There's a group of countries that have been quite far behind. Can those European countries step up and meet their commitments that what Trump administration is asking for?
Well, to be honest, I have to say that, and you mentioned already it, that Belgium has been for a long time a bad pupil in the class. But the new government, which is in place for 5 months, since beginning of February, has decided this year to achieve the initial goal of the 2%. We were last year in 1.3%. So it means that only in a couple of months we have decided to reach the initial target. That's a big step. So frankly speaking, we are now very enthusiastic to be forced to endorse this new target of 5%. But Belgium has already been a reliable partner, and we intend to stay a reliable partner. So it means that we will also not oppose to the 5%. We have, seeing our budgetary situation, to work on a maximum of flexibility mechanism, and we played for that with other countries, but we will be supportive in Den Haag in the coming weeks. That's true. It's important not only because the President Trump asked the partners of the alliance to reach those 5% in the coming years. It's also important for Europe itself because we know that we are facing troubled times, and we still have many concerns when we have a look on the alignment of different countries such as Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. So it means that in the coming years there are still threats coming from different countries, and certainly Russia, against Europe. So we need to also reinforce our own capabilities. And we intend to reinforce the European pillar within the NATO alliance, not against US, certainly not. You know that we are the first consumer of the US defense industry, with 35% of the exportation of the US sector to Europe. And we didn't vote any Buy European Act. So it means that we are able to identify strong partnership. But we also know that the US has the intention to concentrate more attention, let's say, to the India-Pacific region. So it means that, and it is fair, that Europe needs to build a stronger defense industry. Not again against US, of course, but I'm sure that it's also an asset for the US administration having a stronger and unified Europe, we are not rivals. We are partners. And we will work together in order to fight against a more global chaos. So it's really important to know that Belgium intends to be a reliable partner, to invest billions and billions in the defense industry in Europe, but maybe also in the US defense sector, depending on the choices we have to do and to make in the coming weeks, frankly speaking. But I think that it's also a wake-up call for Europe, because we fought for a long time that peace was, let's say, granted. But now we know that we also to reinforce our own capabilities, and it's not only the consequence of the wish of the President Trump, it's really also a clear signal for the Europe itself.
Arseniy, what does Ukraine want from Europe and the US at this point, especially having seen what Europe and the US are delivering?
Well, it's not just a billion-dollar question. First, I would like to thank the American people, the French people, the Belgian people, and the entire free world for the support you've gave to Ukraine. We are very grateful, and we will never forget this. We are fighting for our freedom and independence, and we are fighting for your freedom, independence, and security. Initially you asked General Kellogg about the peace, and frankly speaking, I was thinking to quote General, you're a very honorable and very popular person in Ukraine, to quote your daughter, your amazing daughter, Megan. This week she posted on X, she said, Russians don't want peace. Putin wants war. He wants all of Ukraine. And I have nothing to add, General, frankly speaking.
And my daughter's never been short for words.
She's smart, she's brilliant. I was thinking how to win the argument to get the support of the American people, because it is important for us. Ukraine's defeat lies only in case if you turn your back on Ukraine. I mean, you as Americans. And in our part of the world, it's not very common and popular to say why President Trump is right. But let me do this job. So I believe that President Trump is right when he says that that's not his war. It's true. That's not Trump's war, neither Zelensky's war. It is Putin's war, President Xi war, North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un war, Iranian war against Ukraine and against an entire free world. They are going after us and after you. And no doubt the Chinese, they mastermind it. They are acting behind the curtains. Then President Trump is absolutely correct that Ukraine got $300 billion. But it comprised the US and EU support. Europeans gave $150 billion, as far as I remember, and our American friends gave around $120 billion. So an overall investment into the Ukraine's and your joint security is around $300 billion. But I will tell you frankly what kind of, well, that sounds cynical, but what kind of benefits you got? I mean, as Americans and as an entire free world. Ukrainian military severely degraded Russian land forces. Practically 60% of the Russian land forces have been demolished by the Ukrainian military with your support. We together entirely compromised Russian intelligence. The Russian Tsar is naked. So we are well aware of all the flaws in the Russian military. Russian state coffers switched to Russian state coffins. Because, look, they lost around 1 million people in killed and injured. It's a staggering number. You actually got an experience of a completely new warfare. And the price tag for Ukraine is insurmountable. We are paying with the blood and flesh. But this price actually gives everyone to feel more secure. you actually upgraded your military production, and you realize that it is a wake-up call, and it's important to do as quick as possible in order to rearm. You revamped your stockpiles helping Ukraine. You actually made an inventory of what's up in the US. So my gut feeling is that this is the best ever US and European investment in the history of mankind in your own security. Once again, we are grateful, but this is a two-way street. President Trump is absolutely correct that Iran would never get a nuclear weapon. And that's what Ukraine, as a perfect example, did in 1994. We possessed the third biggest nuclear arsenal in the world. We relinquished this arsenal, and we got a number of, well, there is a debate over the legal definitions, whether this is a guarantees or that's assurance. So let me skip this debate. We got promises that Ukraine is to be secure, and these promises had been co-sponsored by our American friends, United Kingdom, and you know that even Chinese did it, even Chinese. That's a funny thing. And Russians. So how can you pursue Iran to cancel its nuclear program? Having Ukraine and giving Ukraine an example. And the third issue, I do share President Trump's take on Afghanistan withdrawal. It was a disaster. But if Ukraine fails, this would be tenfold higher disaster rather than Afghanistan. With all due respect, Ukraine is not Afghanistan, and that's completely different cases. We wish the US to succeed. We wish your administration and your president to be strong and to reach the peace deal and actually to succeed as both, as a politician and as your country. But in my humble opinion, General, it would be practically impossible if Ukraine fails. Whether Ukraine can win, that's the question you've asked. I don't have a silver bullet, but it seems to me that we already have the silver bullet in our gun. Strong unity. Because the stronger the EU, the stronger the US, and vice versa, and we as Ukraine. Strong sanctions to arm Ukraine, to press on China, to beat the hell out of Putin, and to make Ukraine a NATO and EU member. That's what we need from the EU and the US. That's it, sir.
Okay. I'm going to scramble the order and come back to Maxime. Since you have to go, we've heard Ukrainians, we know Ukrainians are sacrificing their lives. We heard yesterday from the Swedish foreign minister, Swedes feel in danger, the Lithuanians, the frontline countries. Further west in Europe, Europeans don't seem to feel the same level of danger that Ukrainians or frontline countries feel. What's the feeling in Belgium? What is it going to take for more insulated European countries to see a danger from the world beyond?
But you know, in the last European Council with foreign ministers, we discussed about the Russian narratives and the fact that it's a kind of hybrid threat. But I mentioned to my colleagues, and especially to the Eastern ones, that we need to pay attention in countries in the west of Europe, which are a little bit far from the conflict zone, to build also a strong narrative for the investment for defense sector. Because, you know, in many of our countries, we are facing budgetary situation which is quite difficult, with a high level rate of debt and also important deficit. Explaining to the people that it's now time for important reforms related to social security, to the pension, and so on. It's quite difficult for some of the people to understand why we need to make big economies for social security, pension, and so on, and at the same time having billions and billions investment for the defense sector. And we also need to avoid to create a break in the social cohesion. If we divide our public opinion, it will also be a win for Putin's regime. So it's really something we need to pay attention to in order to explain why those investment is really important. Of course, for the security of Ukraine, but as you mentioned it, for our own security, for the defense of our values. Because if you have values without defense, it's just wishes. So we need to explain that the investment for defense sector is not only rearm Europe for war, is clearly invest for peace. Peace is not a deal we make. Peace is a right we defend. And it's also the best way to give to a generation also the capability to dream in the future. So it's why it's really important, of course, for all the military aspects. And we provide strong support since the beginning of the war to Ukraine. Really, and each year we will continue to give billions to Ukraine and military equipment. But we also need to invest, and Belgium already did it, for the civil and also for the students. We also pay for school shelters, for instance, in order to protect thousands of young students in order to avoid to be killed by a bomb. We also provide support to the civil society against all the violence to children, to women, also sexual abuses. That's such also very important. We need to pay attention also to hosting displaced people. It has been the case since the beginning. So we need to work and to stand with Ukraine for values, for protecting our democracy, for pay tribute also to those courageous people, really. And that's really what the Belgian government intend to do. And it's why, maybe anticipate one of your questions, it's why it's important also to keep the Russian assets frozen. You know that in Belgium we are in the front line of this issue because the biggest part of the immobilized assets are in Brussels by Euroclear. And sometimes I heard message asking for confiscation of those assets. That's the wrong way. We are opposed to any confiscation due to the high level of risk, economic risk, financial risk, systemic risk we will face in case of confiscation. But we need absolutely to keep those assets frozen because today they already benefit to Ukraine thanks to the windfall profits and also the fact that it is used for the G7 loans to Ukraine. But it's not only a question of money. That's not only money. That's justice waiting to be served. Because we need to use this money after a peace treaty, let's hope it, in order to rebuild Ukraine with the Russian assets, in order to pay the damage Russia has created. And it's why it's important to continue to keep them frozen thanks to an international mobilization. Belgium alone cannot keep them frozen. It's why the European level of sanction is so important, or an international one. But we absolutely need to continue to use this money in order to give some benefits to the war for Ukraine, of course.
I guess the concern will be that if the war ends a lot of people will want them not to go back to Russia. So it's the mechanism to make sure that doesn't happen.
It's why we need to pull the risk with a European framework which stays strong in order to keep those assets frozen, in order to repair the damage.
Something you said that peace is not a deal. But if there is a peace deal, Benjamin, Europe will have a chance possibly to step up and enforce a peace deal. France has been a leader on organizing this with Britain. It's great in theory. It's easy to talk. But when the moment comes for action, can Europe step up? And if it does, what does it want from the US?
We will have to step up. We will have to step up for the single reason that was mentioned by previous speakers, and I completely agree with what Arseniy and then Maxime said. This is about our security. Ukrainians are fighting for their freedom, for their democracy, for their sovereignty, but they're fighting for the security of all Europeans. It's the front line right now of European democracies against the threat that Russia represents to all of us. And we've seen it even in France. The disinformation, cyber attacks against our infrastructure, our hospitals, the sabotage operations, the threat against the overall European security architecture. I often remind people that this started in 2014 when young Ukrainians were brandishing the EU flag in the streets of Kyiv. This is clearly the EU ideal and the EU architecture that Russia is also striking through its war of aggression against Ukraine. And we've been talking a bit during this conversation about defense spending and Europeans spending more on their security. And the truth is, we need to do it, and we're doing it. Over the 2 terms of the Macron presidency, for example, we'll have doubled our national defense spending, and we need to continue to do it. It's a generational effort of rearmament from Europeans, both domestically, but also spending more and coordinating more on how we bolster our defense industry at the European level. We've had some major decisions that were made by the European Commission in the last few weeks to go in that direction, and I hope that we go further. Not because US administrations, Republicans or Democrats are asking us to do it, and I actually think it's a legitimate thing for Americans to ask, but because, once again, it's for ourselves. It's for our security. Since the Second World War, we've outsourced our security to the United States, but we see now a conflictual environment around us. We see threats. We see maybe the United States also having other areas of focus. And so we clearly need collectively to bolster the European pillar of the alliance and work with our allies to defend our values and security. And to answer directly your question, of course, one of the first steps of this will be the long-term peace in Ukraine. As I mentioned earlier, first, this means bolstering the Ukrainian army. And so continuing in the long run our support and maybe plugging together, this is what we're doing with the SAFE instrument that was just negotiated, the European Commission, plugging the European defense industry, the Ukrainian defense industry. We have so much to learn. There's so much innovation. I mean, if we just look at what's been happening in the last couple of weeks, so much innovation coming out of Ukraine. So I think clearly this is something on which we can both benefit from each other. And Europeans will have to take their share in responsibility in guaranteeing the peace. President Macron has mentioned the deployment of European troops, not fighting forces, of course, or on the front line, but reassurance forces, a little bit like what you have already within NATO and the Baltic states or in Poland in key strategic points in Ukraine, to send a message of deterrence and to say that, once again, the peace that we have tomorrow cannot just be a parenthesis that Russia uses to regroup. We'll have to take our responsibility. I hope that we continue to work also with the US and continue to show clarity of purpose and unity. Were it only because, once again, you know, when we talk about what's happening in Ukraine not being just a territorial conflict or a local issue, but something more European or even more global, look at the other side. They completely understand it. You have Iranian drones and missiles. You have North Korean troops. You have China helping Russia economically. They understand this is not just about Ukraine or about a few regions or a local issue, but this is a global security issue. So this is why clearly Europeans with our allies and friends in the United States. We'll have to take our share and our responsibility in the long run, because this is first and foremost our security interest.
One more question for you, and then we're running out of time. I want to come back to Arseniy for the final word. But General Kellogg, I know you've got something you want to say, and I understand you don't speak for President Trump, but he has issued verbal warnings to President Putin. He's sort of threatened him. But do you have a sense what red line does Putin have to cross? What has to happen before President Trump will say, enough, we're taking action?
Yeah, it's a great question. I said, let me go back just for a second. What you said is, you know, when in the first Trump administration, you saw a lot of rhetoric there about the concerns about the Europeans. Europe, it's a different Europe from 4 years ago. The European nations have really stepped up. And when I look at what I call the E3, the British, the French, and the Germans, and the work they've done recently in the peace work, it's really been really, really good. And they've really stepped up to support, and it's really appreciated and it's noticed. Even, I think our Secretary of Defense was even asked that question in hearings yesterday, and he acknowledged that the Europeans have stepped up to do it. And you're right, I don't speak for President Trump, and I know that his instincts are really good, and I know he has concerns on where this is going to go, primarily because of the human dimension of it. But the only one who really knows where it's going to be, what crosses the line, is the only one who knows that is Donald J. Trump. It's in his mind, and he's probably got that in his mind somewhere, where he's saying, okay, this is what the American term we use is a bridge too far. You know, when, okay, this has gone a little bit far on it. And I think part of that is what you're seeing is the horrific loss of life on the bombardments we see going into Kyiv, and the killings of innocents, the women and the children. That I know that affects him, because it affects all of us as fathers and mothers, and we've seen sons and daughters die. When you watch that happen in Ukraine, it does affect what you're seeing and where you want to go long term. And it is a totally different world, and it's a different world than we were in 4 years ago. You know, President Trump, to his credit, 4 years ago, there's an American arcade game. It's called Whack-A-Mole. I don't know if you've ever seen it, where you go to the game and you play this game, and a mole comes up and you get a hammer and you knock the mole goes down. You know, 4 years ago, President Trump had segmented out. He'd put the North Koreans over here, the Chinese over here, the Iranians, the Middle East here, and the Russians over here. Now they're all like this. They're all together. And that's a real threat to all of us, because now you've got a unified adversarial network out there that is economically strong, diplomatically strong, militarily strong. And you don't want that to continue because of the long-term effects on that. So you kind of try to break that apart. And President Trump's smart enough that he'll figure out how to go after that, how to address that with his advisors. And I think that's going to be important where it goes to. But Dan, when you mentioned about what we'd call a red line, he does not believe in what we call red lines, that you and I would traditionally call a red line. He doesn't go there at all. He'll have concerns, and what those concerns mean and where they go to. But I think he goes back to the personal side of it, where he wants to talk to Putin and figures, okay, how do I establish this relationship with Putin, and how do we get out of this in a diplomatic way? And if any of you got any good ideas, I'm more than willing to listen, because we have tried for a long time to figure out how do we address it. We believe the Ukrainians have come up with what we call a very reasonable plan, a reasonable discussion point. And the question is, okay, to have good negotiations, you have to have both sides being reasonable. You know, both sides are not going to get everything they want. So the question is, where do you go to? How do you do that balance? You put this term sheet here, this term sheet here. Can you bring them together and move that together to get it in a positive way? We think you can. We think there's enough elements out there that they're able to be worked, that you can get to a point of at least getting the leaders into a room and sitting around and talking to it. And the next meeting, they'll have probably technical meetings again. What does the technical meetings mean? It means, how do you get to a final peace deal? We want to get to a ceasefire because that stops the killing right away. And we believe if you can build it on a sustainable ceasefire over time, you can actually move into a peace deal. The Russians want to start with a peace deal and work their way into a ceasefire. We're just the opposite. Give us the ceasefire, gives us breathing space and time to do it. We can sit down and say, okay, what does this look like? What does a long-term peace treaty look like between the belligerents? And hopefully that's where we want to be. President Trump has given us a lot of breathing time, breathing space. He's given us guidance where we want to go to. And that's what we're trying to get to, is that place where there's a comfort level. I'd remind everybody, every year there's a UN General Assembly. It's in September of every year. When you go back to President Trump and his first UNGA, first UN General Assembly, one of the key things he talked about was national sovereignty and the importance of national sovereignty of a nation. And he spoke at length about sovereignty and the importance of sovereignty of a nation. And he basically said in that discussion, I was there in New York City when he did it, and it was basically, if you fight for sovereignty, we'll be with you when you fight for it. And because to him, every nation should fight for their own national sovereignty, who they are and what they are. And that's kind of where maybe this year's coming UNGA, that could be one of the issues, is what does sovereignty look like among nations? And how do you ensure that sovereignty reigns well, that every nation is protected by that for their national survival? Dan, I don't have an answer for you because I'm not going to speak for the president.
Okay.
But I think that's it's a fair question, and I'm sure historical scholars will write about this well into the future, and we'll see what it looks like into the future, where everybody wants to be, what they want to do. And we're also going to find out, when I went back to there about the cataclysmic nature of any conflict, what were the signals that we missed? Yeah. And I will lay you money when we go back and look at this, and there'll be plenty, I guarantee you, there's going to be a book trade on this stuff. Yeah. Who wrote the books and what signals were missed when you had the opportunity to bring this to closure?
I'm getting angry signals, but I have to give Arseniy a last moment. Maybe quickly, we're over time, but if by some chance there's peace in Ukraine, can Ukraine seize the moment, or will it fall back into infighting and corruption?
If the peace comes, which I have doubts about, Ukraine will be one of the best EU and NATO members. That's for sure. But the thing is, whether designated war criminal Putin wants peace. I know the beast in person. So I negotiated with the beast, with Lavrov, and with the rest of the gang. So I know their mindset. Look, there is only one way to get the peace out of Putin, is to press like hell on him, period. He doesn't want to get any kind of peace. What he wants an entire Ukraine, and he wants to put in jeopardy an entire EU and NATO. He wants to dismantle you and to disrupt you. That's his ultimate goals. And once again, he is not the only one. She is behind him. So the only recipe, sir, is to stay united, and we are running out of time not only at this particular panel, we are running out of time in the war too, So Putin doesn't care about any kind of verbal threats. What he cares about actions. It's time to act and to win. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you to the panel. Thank you everyone for bearing with us over time, but important things needed to be said. So we will relinquish the stage. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Ms. Kristen Sultan Anderson for our next spotlight discussion.